Alright, you guys, today I'm going to talk about glazing, and specifically I want to talk about glazing the monster and just show you guys a couple of different ideas or techniques for your creature and talk about really the process and the best practice for glazing. So that's what I'm going to work on today. First of all, I've got a piece of paper and I'm going to put this underneath my glazing area. You guys have your board or wherever you're at in your house. I just don't want to get it on my work surface. And if I glaze on top of a piece of paper, I can pretty easily throw that away when I'm done. Okay, so as a good student, I already came to school. I have picked up fire brick, which is red. It looks purple in this. This is brown. It looks gray. And then this is cobalt. And cobalt is a bright, it's like an intense dark blue. Okay, so those were the colors I picked up. I also still have some clear because I've never used it. So I'm going to show you a way to use that for your monster as well. All right, so here's my monster. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my fire brick, and this is going to turn red. So first thing I'm going to do is stir my glaze really well. Here at the school, you would do the same thing. The glazes are just in a really big tub, so they kind of settle as they sit. This guy's going to have a red tongue, so I'm going to use my fire brick and just kind of load my brush and paint the monster or his tongue. And you need to have at least 2 layers of glaze everywhere. So you do it, it dries really quick, so you can kind of see already it's mostly dry. So 2 layers of glaze. And if you get it anywhere that you don't want it, you can just wipe it up with a wet sponge, okay? And as you can see, I'm only gonna use a very small portion of that red, just because the tongue is really small. So I might wanna think of maybe popping that color somewhere else. So maybe I could do these kind of eerie, whatever they are, big swirly ears, or his feet with the red. So I'll kind of think about that for a few minutes. Wash my paintbrush out really well, put my lid back on. I want you guys to keep your glaze. So if you end up having leftover glaze, you can drop this off when you come back to school. Glaze is really expensive, in particular the fire brick. It can cost about $70 for a gallon of that. Okay, so the next step is my brown. And with the brown, I'm actually gonna do the bulk of my monster with this brown. The brown I gave you guys, like I said, it looks really blue. It's a mottled brown, which means it's gonna have a lot of kind of texture and variation to it. So with this, I actually have a bigger paintbrush. If you have one at home, great. If not, you can make do with a small paintbrush. So I'm gonna work on kind of jamming this into all the nooks and crannies, all those textures that I made on my monster. And then I'm gonna wipe some of it off. And what that will do is make some of that just kind of stick in the grooves, but it gives the monster some variation with color. So similar to some of the ones that we looked at with James DeRosso. Okay, so I'm not gonna glaze this whole thing on the video. I'll do it later, but I'll just get enough done that you guys can kind of see. Okay, so we'll imagine, for the sake of this little demonstration, that I have just done 2 full layers. So going all the way around my monster twice. Nooks and crannies, double checking, looking from different angles to make sure you've kind of got that everywhere that you want it. Okay, and then once it's dry, which you can tell, so here's again, 2 seconds ago, now, it dries really fast, okay, and that's because your clay is still really porous, so it's absorbing the water out of the glaze. So once that's dry, I'm gonna take my sponge and sponge some of that off of my monster where I want that texture to be more obvious. So I've got a wet sponge right here, and just in maybe some certain areas. So kind of here where I've got the fur kind of stuff around the legs, I'll just wipe off just a little bit of the glaze, so it looks like that. That means this glaze is, or this area is gonna look kind of off-white. That's what the clay looks like when it comes out of the glaze kiln. The other areas are gonna be brown, so it creates kind of a nice contrast. It's gonna make it look just a little bit more variation. So there's another spot. And I do this all the time in my own work, so I really love how things look when they've been kind of just wiped down just a little bit, okay? If you wanted to go crazy with this idea, you can actually wipe down the entire surface of that monster, and the glaze is just gonna stay in the grooves. So that's another technique for glazing. So now that glaze is just in the grooves. And if I liked that approach, what I would do is let this dry again, so maybe another 5 minutes, and then I would just paint clear glaze over that. It'll make that part shiny. The color is going to be in the grooves. The rest of it is going to be clear, but it'll still have a nice shine to it. Okay, the other glaze I have is cobalt. So this one here, and as a reminder, cobalt is going to be that dark, vibrant blue. And for the cobalt, you know, I could do his eyes if I wanted them to be bright blue, or maybe the horns. So just thinking about another spot where I could add more color. I don't think with this guy it's particularly necessary. I mostly wanted you guys to know how much that color is going to change in the kiln. Okay, so the last thing I would do on my monster is actually use some of my clear. And this clear has been sitting for a couple of weeks, so it definitely needs to be stirred really well. So just taking my speed, I can feel the sediment on the bottom of that cup. Okay, so everything that you guys have, you know, it's probably been sitting the same. Look at how goopy it is. So really, really stir that. And the clear only needs to go where you don't want color. I lost my paintbrush. Okay, so now I'll use that. And I was thinking, really, like my teeth, I want them to stay white. So I do want them to be shiny, which means I'm just going to put some clear onto the teeth, and that will make them come out of the kiln nice and shiny, so it's still going to match everything and look finished, but they're not going to change color. They're still going to stay white. Okay, so the clear only goes in places that you want the color to remain neutral. The clay of our class kind of comes out that yellowy color at the end. But you don't need to take clear and do it over your whole thing. Okay, glaze is naturally glass. It turns into glass in the kiln, so you do not need to put additional glass onto it. All right, so only thing left to talk about is this. So I'm a really messy student all of a sudden. I've got glaze everywhere. And if you are to bring your project to Miss Erickson like this, she'll cry. Okay, so what I need you guys to do is if you do get glaze anywhere on the bottom of your project, take your wet sponge and wash that off, and it washes right off. And then also make sure that your glaze is about 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch from the bottom here. What that does is in the kiln, if that glaze starts to drip and run, it's gonna have a little bit of a break before it comes down and hits onto the kiln shelf. So you always want a little space there for the glaze to move in the kiln. All right, so that's kind of how to glaze, especially for your monster in a nutshell. If you still have your flower at home and you wanted to do the clear and then drip some other colors onto that, now that I've got colors out for you guys, you could do that. Definitely the clear should only be used for your pinch pot since it has that black underglaze on it, make sure that you have the clear glaze over that one particular. Everything else you could use additional colors for that. All right, if you have any questions, as always, just shoot me an email.